Welcome in, everyone, ready to dive deep. Today, we're tackling Framed, a book that throws light on a tough subject, wrongful convictions right here in America. And you've asked specifically, how do these miscarriages of justice happen? Is it always about racial bias, or is there more to it?
We'll definitely unpack all that, but get this. The 10 cases in this book, they might surprise you. It's easy to think, oh, open and shut case, but often it's way more complicated.
So before we get into these gripping stories, and believe me, they are gripping, let's set the stage. Framed. John Grisham, the legal thriller guy, right? And Jim McCloskey, who started Centurion Ministries, which helps free innocent people. That's quite the duo for a book like this.
Powerful combo, right? You've got Grisham, he knows how to tell a story, makes all that legal stuff easy to understand, and then McCloskey.
Yeah.
He's lived it. He's actually helped free many of the people whose cases are in Framed.
That mix of storytelling and real-life stakes, it makes you think. Okay, so 10 cases, 23 people wrongly convicted, anything in common that points to bigger problems.
Absolutely, and this is where it gets, and I hate to say fascinating given what happened, but it is, one huge issue, faulty forensic science. We're talking cases where the science they used to convict someone was either wrong from the start or, get this, has been totally debunked since then.
Like the Norfolk Four, right.
Right.
4 guys, Navy sailors, forced into confessing to a rape and murder they didn't do. And the crazy thing is, DNA evidence later totally cleared them.
And if that's not bad enough, hold on, because it gets worse. The real perpetrator, they found his DNA, a match. No doubt about their innocence. Talking about a messed up situation, right? This case, it's like the poster child for how messed up things can get when you mix bad science with everything else that went wrong.
It really makes you wonder how with DNA evidence staring them in the face, could they even get convicted in the first place? Seriously, it's scary.
It's like a perfect storm, but one ingredient that pops up again and again in Framed is this: coerced confessions. Take the Norfolk Four. The detectives, especially this one, Detective Glenn Ford, they went full-on aggressive. I mean, imagine being grilled for hours, lied to about evidence, told, hey, confess and we'll go easy on you. Talk about pressure, especially if you're young, don't know any better.
Which is exactly what happened to Joe Dick, one of the Norfolk Four.
Yeah.
The book goes into detail how he confessed to something he didn't do, putting his faith in the system, thinking the DNA will clear my name.
And that's the heartbreaking part. For Joe, for so many others, that trust, it's shattered. But there's another layer to this Norfolk Four case, another systemic issue.
Ida.
Tunnel vision, confirmation bias, they call it. Like once the police decided it was those sailors, that was it, blinders on. Didn't matter what else was out there.
Even when this other guy, Omar Ballard, his DNA linked him to the crime.
Exactly. Even though Ballard had a history, violence against women, nope, didn't matter. They were so focused on the sailors, they missed it. Totally ignored them. It just shows you how powerful bias can be, even if you don't realize you're doing it. Innocent people pay the price. And this isn't just one bad apple, okay? Look at Joe Bryan, convicted of murdering his wife. Totally wrongly accused.
So in Joe's case, what went wrong? How'd they get so far off track?
This is where it gets really disturbing. The investigators, they got fixated on this idea that Joe was gay, thought that was his motive. Problem is, there was absolutely zero evidence to support it.
You're kidding. All right, someone's whole life turned upside down over something like that just because of prejudice. That's just wrong on so many levels.
Tell me about it. And it gets worse. Because they were so busy with his bogus theory, they missed important stuff, like Joe's alibi. Had holes in it, they just didn't see him. No physical evidence connecting him either. Blinders were on, plain and simple.
So who actually did it in Joe's case?
Turns out it was a local cop, Dennis Dunlap. They later connected him to another murder, too.
Wait, so they're building a case on this crazy theory about Joe's sexuality, and the real killer, another cop no less, is right under their noses the whole time.
It's a tunnel vision trap. It's like looking through a straw, you miss the bigger picture completely. And in Joe's case, it cost him years, decades of his life. These cases, they're just the tip of the iceberg, Makes you wonder about the system itself.
Makes you wonder how many other innocent people are out there, right? It's a scary thought. But we're not done yet. We've only just begun to scratch the surface of Framed and the systemic issues it uncovers. Stay with us as we dive deeper into more cases, more injustices, and hopefully some answers.
It's tough, To think someone could be locked up for years, decades even, based on something as flimsy as bite mark analysis makes you wonder about the whole system, doesn't it?
It's unsettling for sure. LaVaughn and Kennedy's cases, they show how deep this goes, beyond just one bad forensic technique. It's like sometimes the system cares more about getting a conviction than finding the truth. And that is a chilling thought. But Framed, it's not all doom and gloom, right? I mean, we got to talk about the people who lived through this, talk about resilience.
Couldn't agree more. These individuals, they went through hell and back, yet they never gave up fighting for their freedom. Their stories, they're a testament to the human spirit, proof that hope can exist even in the darkest of places.
It's that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But in this case, it's more like, what didn't break, you fueled your fight.
Exactly. The Norfolk Four, think about what they endured, not just being locked up, but the public shame, the scrutiny. Accused of such a horrific crime, yet they held their heads high, never wavered, always maintained their innocence, supported each other through thick and thin, and finally, thanks to those who believed in them and the power of DNA evidence, they were exonerated.
A victory, sure, but at what cost? I can't even imagine the emotional toll that takes.
Absolutely. And then there's Joe Bryan, wrongly convicted of killing his wife. But throughout it all, he held on to his faith, never wavered in his belief in his own innocence.
Joe's story, it really hits home how insidious societal biases can be. It reminds us that evidence, cold, hard facts, should always trump assumptions, especially when someone's life hangs in the balance.
You said it. Decades he spent behind bars. But he never stopped fighting, even when it felt like he was up against the whole world. And yeah, his release was a long time coming, but it's a testament to the power of perseverance. Never letting yourself be silenced.
Inspiring, heartbreaking, it's both, isn't it? But not every story has a happy ending, does it? Clarence Brandley, sentenced to death in a town drowning in racial prejudice. His story, it just lays bare how bias can poison the pursuit of justice.
Clarence's case, it's a stark reminder. Progress or not, racial bias, it still casts a long shadow. He became the scapegoat, the easy target in a town grappling with its own demons. Tells us we've still got a long way to go in the fight for equality.
Sobering, to say the least. And sadly, Clarence's case, it's not unique. Framed reveals this pattern, this bias against black men accused of crimes against white victims. Charles Finch in Louisiana, his story is another gut punch.
You're right, Charles, convicted of murdering a white store clerk. And what was the evidence? Shaky eyewitness accounts, questionable identification procedures, that's it.
It's in the book how the eyewitnesses, in Charles's case, they were shown a lineup where he was the only one dressed like the supposed perpetrator. Talk about stacking the deck.
Right. It just goes to show even small details can be twisted, on purpose or not, to fit a narrative. These little biases, they can have devastating consequences.
Makes you think twice about how easily someone's life can be destroyed based on, what? Flawed procedures. It's terrifying. And for Charles, it cost him almost 40 years.
Justice delayed is justice denied, they say. But more importantly, Charles's case, it screams for reform. We need to tackle these biases head on. Investigations have to be fair, impartial, focused on evidence, not preconceived notions or outside pressure.
Speaking of pressure, the book also talks about those cases, high-profile ones where everyone wants a quick resolution, so they toss due process out the window, rush to judgment. The case of the 3 Army soldiers, Mark Jones, Kenneth Gardner, and Dominic Lucci, that comes to mind.
Ah, the Savannah 3, right. Their case, it's a lesson in what happens when public pressure, the fear of looking ineffective, it trumps everything else. And who pays the price? Innocent people.
So give us the rundown. Who were the Savannah 3?
3 soldiers, 2 white, 1 Hispanic, stationed at Fort Stewart near Savannah, Georgia. Accused of murdering a black man in a drive-by. Didn't do it, of course. But here's the thing. Savannah at the time, dealing with a wave of racially motivated crimes, pressure was on to solve them, no matter what.
So these soldiers, they became the scapegoats. Easy targets in a city desperate for answers.
Exactly. The police, they were under the microscope, and these guys, they'd been drinking at a club, mostly black clientele, before the murder. Fit the narrative, even if the evidence was paper thin.
But come on, public pressure, wanting to calm things down, that shouldn't ever come before a real investigation. Dangerous precedent to set.
No doubt. And what happened? The facts were ignored. They hung their case on one eyewitness, and his story was full of holes. Plus, these guys had alibis, solid ones, totally dismissed.
Makes you mad, doesn't it? How easily the presumption of innocence goes out the window when the public wants a conviction.
It just shows justice shouldn't be swayed by public opinion or politics. The Savannah 3, their case shows how important a strong defense is. You need someone to fight for you, even when everyone else is against you.
Reminds us that justice is fragile. When fear and prejudice take over, it's the principles of justice themselves that are on trial. And speaking of narratives, Framed also digs into tunnel vision, right? When the cops get so focused on one suspect, they miss everything else.
Tunnel vision, it's like this. Investigators get locked onto a theory, and suddenly anything that doesn't fit, it just disappears.
Oh.
Evidence. Doesn't matter if it goes against their story.
We saw it with the Norfolk Four, but Framed is full of cases like that. Betty Wilson, this grandmother, accused of murdering her own granddaughter. Now that's a case that sticks with you.
Betty's story, it shows how fast assumptions become convictions, even when there's nothing to support them. Accused of killing her granddaughter, horrible crime, shook the community. The investigators, they latched onto this flawed medical report, suggested abuse, and that was it. Betty was guilty in their eyes.
The book mentions this medical examiner, the guy who examined Betty's granddaughter. He had a history, made questionable calls before, even got reprimanded. That's not exactly reassuring.
Not at all. But his word, it was enough to bury Betty. No other evidence didn't matter. They ignored her alibi, disregarded the fact that she loved her granddaughter, turned her into a monster in everyone's eyes.
It's frightening, isn't it? One person, one flawed assessment, and someone's life is ruined. And this guy, he was supposed to be an expert.
It reveals a flaw, a real weakness in the system. We rely too much on these so-called experts. Don't question them enough. Don't even consider other opinions. Betty's case, so many others in Framed, they show we need serious oversight when it comes to forensics and expert testimony.
It's a wake-up call. Experts, they get things wrong too. And believing them blindly, that can have tragic consequences.
Exactly. We can never stop questioning, never stop looking for the truth. We can't let bias, pressure, or bad science get in the way of justice. Framed, it's a reminder that the fight for a fairer system is far from over.
It's a fight we all need to be part of. Demands our attention, our action, our commitment to fairness and truth. But Framed doesn't just point fingers. It also shines a light on a really troubling practice. Jailhouse informants. These guys, they cut deals, testify against others in exchange for later sentences. Talk about ethical dilemmas.
Yeah, using jailhouse informants, it's always been controversial, and for good reason. Think about it. You're facing serious time, and suddenly you've got a chance to reduce your sentence. Pretty tempting to make stuff up, right?
And Framed, it shows just how dangerous this practice can be. The Chester Three, Jonathan Palmer, Chester Holman III, and Terrence Lewis, their story is a prime example of how the word of a jailhouse informant, even if it's shaky at best, can send someone away for life.
The Chester Three, convicted of murder in Philly, all because this one guy, another inmate, claimed they confessed to him. But guess what? Later on, turns out this guy's story was full of holes, contradicted by other witnesses.
And yet, the prosecution, they went with it anyway. The Chester Three, guilty. Sentenced to life, it's enough to give you chills.
It exposes how easily the system can be manipulated, how badly some people want a conviction, even if it means ignoring the truth. The Chester Three, so many others, their stories tell us. We need to be incredibly careful with jailhouse informants. Stricter rules, more scrutiny. Find some real evidence before you put someone away based on their word alone.
It's about finding that balance right, making sure the guilty are punished, but also protecting the innocent from getting caught in the crossfire.
You got it. And maybe the most powerful example, the one that really makes you think about this balance, is Cameron Todd Willingham, convicted of arson, murder, and ultimately executed. But to this day, there are still serious doubts about whether he actually did it. This case, more than any other in Framed, it asks the toughest question. What are we willing to risk for justice? And how can we be absolutely sure, without a doubt, that we're punishing the guilty, not executing the innocent?
Cameron Todd Willingham, his case really gets into your skin, you know? Accused of setting a fire, killing his own daughters, horrific. You can understand why people wanted justice, and fast. But like so many cases we've talked about, the closer you look, things aren't so clear-cut.
No, they really aren't.
Yeah.
Willingham's case, it's a tragedy on so many levels. Makes you question everything, especially with the death penalty on the table.
From the start, Willingham said he didn't do it, but they convicted him anyway. The fire investigators, they said it was arson, right? What'd they base that on?
Well, at the time, they pointed to a few things, like brown stains on the porch, crazed glass patterns, they called them. Supposedly meant the fire was really hot really fast, so they figured accelerant must be arson.
But like we've seen, what passes for evidence back then, it doesn't always hold up. Science moves on, right? And that's what happened with Willingham.
Exactly. The book talks about this guy, Dr. Gerald Hurst, a top fire scientist. He looked at Willingham's case, and guess what? Found holes, big ones, in the investigation. Those so-called arson indicators, they were based on outdated science, didn't mean what they thought it meant.
Hold on, so you're telling me this man was sent to death row, was executed based on bad science? That's unbelievable.
That's a scary thought. What we think is foolproof evidence today might be completely wrong tomorrow. Science is always learning, always changing.
And for Willingham, that knowledge came too late. Even with Dr. Hurst's findings, even with him saying the fire was probably an accident, they still executed him. 2004.
His case, it shook things up, that's for sure. People started questioning the death penalty, arson investigation, the whole 9 yards, made everyone realize we need to be damn sure, especially when someone's life is at stake.
It shows that even with the best intentions, we're human, we make mistakes, we're biased, we rely on things that might be wrong.
And that's the heart of Framed, isn't it? Justice, it's not some perfect system. It's messy, it's flawed.
Yeah.
We have to admit that even the good guys, even the whole system, can get it wrong.
It's about remembering that everyone involved, victims, accused, everyone, they're human. And we need a system that's just, but also compassionate.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Framed, it shows the dark side of justice, but it also lights a fire under us, Makes you want to do something.
We need to be more aware, more skeptical, question the evidence, understand how bias works, push for real change. That's how we honor the people who were wrongly convicted. We make sure it doesn't happen again.
We owe it to them to keep fighting, to build a future where these stories, these injustices, they're just that, stories, not something happening right now.
So we've reached the end of our deep dive into Framed. We've barely scratched the surface, really. But these cases, these voices, they matter. They remind us that the fight for justice, it never ends.
It's on all of us to keep our eyes open, to stay engaged, to keep fighting for a system that's truly just for everyone, no matter who they are, no matter their circumstances.
This deep dive, it's been heavy, but so important. And if it's made you think, made you question, made you want to get involved, then we've done our job.
Because justice, it's not the finish line, it's the journey. And we're all in this together.